All right, welcome back everybody. And in this video, we're finally going to get into some cool stuff which include animation states. Animation states really allow us to control the movement of our character in a much more natural sort of way. Right now, where we left off, we have our character sort of moving through the scene. I'll just kind of replay so you guys can see. Moving through the scene, he walks all the time. We get hit. It restarts right away. We hear the oof sound. But the truth is that sound, the death sound, that oof that we're hearing, is not actually him dying. What we're hearing is the sound replaying when the scene reloads. Okay, because if you remember in the last video, when he collides with an enemy, it loads scene 0. And at the start of that scene, you'll notice that if we go to our player, the death sound is set to play on awake, which means that the sound is going to play when the game loads. All right, so we're actually going to fix that up right now. We're going to turn this off. All right, we're going to go inside of our enemy collision. We're going to double click that. And we're going to clean this up a little bit. What we're going to do is we're actually going to take out the collision clip, audio clip. We're also going to take out this because we don't need them. All right, this audio source.play is just, it's enough for it to play that sound without us having to hear it twice. However, in order for that to play when we die, we actually need a bit of a delay before it loads the scene and goes on to the next scene. All right, and we're going to come back to this later in the video, but that's very important to give our character enough time to actually play the sound before the scene loads. Otherwise, you'll notice now if we play, I don't know if I saved actually. Oh, I did. When I die, you won't hear any sounds. There's no oof sound because we don't have enough time for that to happen. It just happens instantly. So let's get into animation states. Let's look at that first, and we'll come back to the sound after. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our assets here, and we're going to go into our player. And what I want you to do is import 2 new assets that I've got here inside of the update 3. Death and idle. Okay, so these are 2 new animations that are going to play with our character, and you will see that they will come in with their own library of materials and everything. And because it's the same character, it just works because we're basically just taking the animation from each of these. So if I go into the death one, this is the death one here, and I click the animation and I hit play, you'll see what that looks like. He falls back and dies. In the idle one, if I go to that one, which is right here, and I play it, he just kind of stands on the spot and breathes. All right, you can see his shoulders go up and down a little bit. So how do we control that? Now, this is where things get a little tricky. All right, we're going to control that using animation states. And we're going to control when those play by using triggers. All right, so here's how you would do that. In the top tab, you will see something that says Animator. And if you click that, right now, you will see, it may not say walking here, it might say Mixomoto, but walking is our default animation that plays. So when the game loads, when it enters, the character enters, it goes straight to walking. And if you didn't change the name here, you can change it here. Make sure it says walking. Okay, I'll just type it again, but this is where you change the name of that state. Now you'll notice that this state is orange. And the reason it's orange is because this is the default state of our character, meaning that our character will start walking right away and won't stop walking because there's no other state for him to go to. He's always going to walk. All right, so what we're going to do here is while we have this open, we're going to bring in 2 new ones. So we've got the death animation, which is in here. It's right here. Now it's kind of tricky. You got to keep track of what's what. But if we click this, we play it, we can see that that's the death animation. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag that in And we're going to rename it right away so we know exactly what that is. It's death. Okay, so there's the death. All right. We're also going to go to idle. And we're going to get that animation, which is right here, where he's standing on the spot and just breathing. So we're going to bring that into here as well. And that one is going to be named, idle. All right, and there it is. By default, when no keys are pressed, we don't want him walking. We want him in idle. That's what he should be doing. He shouldn't be walking all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this state, and we're going to say that this is our default state. Our character by default will be in idle state. He will be idling. He will just be sitting there idle. And by the way, guys, you can move this around just like any other window in Unity using the center mouse button. You can move it around, you can look around, you can zoom in and all the rest of it, which is really handy. So I moved this in such a way that death is over here and walking's over here so that both of these states can access death, because if you die, it can happen from the idle state or the walking state. So I kind of put it in a place where it can be accessed by both. Hopefully this is making sense so far. So right now all we've got is the default being set to idle. And if we play our game, you're going to see now that he no longer walks. He simply stands there, his shoulders move a little bit, and when we move, we're back to sliding because he doesn't know that he's supposed to walk when a button is pressed. So we're going to go back to our animator. Now this is where things get a little tricky. So from our idle state, what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to make a transition. And the transition is going to go from the idle state to walking. All right, so from idle to walking, we now have a link. We're also going to make a link from walking back to idle. And the reason is, if we stop walking, we're going to want it to go back to idle. That's just the way it should work. All right, but in order for this to work, we have to actually have a trigger or a Boolean in this case, or something that tells it when it should switch to that state. So you'll notice over on the left-hand side, we got layers and parameters. And parameters is what we use to control this. So if I hit the little plus right here, I'm going to choose bool. And if you know about Booleans, they can either be true or false. So when we create a Boolean, we're going to call this Boolean walk. All right, it's going to be walk. And we now have a Boolean that it can either be true or false, and it's called walk. Now, how do we attach that to the idle state? So here's how we do it. You'll see this little arrow going down to the walking state. In this window over on the right-hand side, this is controlling the transition from idle state to walking. And you'll see if we hit the little play, it's going to show us that transition from idle, and eventually it'll get to walking. Now, there's an issue here, because what Unity will do by default is it will have an exit time, which means that it will play the entire clip before it goes to the next one. So what we want to do is we want to turn that off. And what we'll have is an instant transition from walking to idle. You'll see it when we actually test this out. If we scroll down in this window, you will see conditions. All right, now this is the most important part. What conditions need to be met in order for our character to go from idle to walking? So we're going to click the little plus, and you'll notice that automatically it finds our parameters that we created over here, which is walk. So in order for our character to go from idle to walking, the walk Boolean has to be set to true. All right, hopefully that makes sense, right? If he's walking, the walk Boolean is set to true. And if he's not walking, which is this arrow going up, we will turn off the exit time. We will go down to conditions. We want walk to be set to false. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If this Boolean is set to true, he will switch to walking. And if it's set to false, he'll go back to idle. Now, how do we control that in our script? All right, this is the important part. We have to actually tell it to run a animator boolean in this case. We have to actually tell it to run that in order for it to work. So we're going to go back to our scene, and we're going to go to our assets, and we're going to go to our scripts. And in this case, this is going to be controlled by the move controller, because that's where we control his movement. So we go into the move controller, and we're going to add a new thing here. And I've already got it here because I added it already. I'll just type it again so you guys can see. Public animator animator. Okay, public animator animator. This can be named whatever you want, but it's an animator object. Okay. And to set the Boolean to true, anytime a key is pressed, what we need to do is after the first one, which is A, it's the first one that comes up in our list, we're going to go type animator, animator, I can't type tonight, dot set bool, walk, okay, and we got to be careful here because I think I used a capital, guy has to be exact, is true. Okay, so if we press the A key, walk will be set to true. And if we look at our animator we had earlier, that walk, which it was a capital, if it's set to true, it's going to switch to the walking animation. Okay, that's what should happen. Make sure exit times are turned off so that it does the animation instantly. Okay, very important. So let's go back and let's take a quick look. So what we did here, we got the Boolean set to walk is true. We have the animator object added. We're going to save this. We have to attach, let's just double check. We have to go to our player where that script is added, move controls, and we're going to need to add our character model to the animator. All right, so I'll just remove this to show you. I'll just, let me just get rid of that. I'll just say none for a second here. I'll just delete that. You know what? It's fine. Yours will probably say none. So what you got to do is take your character model, because that's what we're affecting here, right? We're on player. We're going to take our character model. We're going to add it, to the animator object. So what this is telling Unity is that the animator object affects the character model. And the trigger is the Boolean being set to true. So far, the only key that we have set up is the A key, which will be the left movement. And let's test it out. So if we press play, we press the A key, you will see that now he starts walking. And the thing is, he's not being told to go back to the idle state, so he'll just keep on walking. Once it's set to true, it basically goes back to how it was. All right, and that's not really what we want. So let's go back to our move controls. And what we're going to do is we're going to add this line. We're just going to copy it. Command C or Control C, depending on what you're on. And we're going to put this same line into every movement, including, it's not necessary, but including these ones here too. Oops, oh shoot, I built by accident. That's okay. We'll close that. So I'm going to put this inside of every line. Come on. I'm really off today. Okay. And then what we're also going to add is we want to put a condition where if no keys are pressed, if there is no input, we want it to go back to idle. And this is really simple because what we can add after all of these if statements, we could put one more if statement. And this if statement will say exclamation mark, not input. So if not input, any key, any key, any key, then the animator dot set bool walk, walk, will be set to false. Okay, so let me explain what's happening here. I don't want to confuse anybody here. When we're pressing any key, it doesn't matter. We didn't even have to do the ones with the combos because it would already be working. But when we set any key, it is setting that Boolean to true, which we know is setting the animation state to a walk cycle. This line down here, when you have an exclamation mark, it basically means if not, the word not. So if not inputting any key, if you aren't pressing any key at the time, so any other state other than key down, you will have it set to false. Now let's test this out. Let's save it and let's give it a shot. Okay, so hopefully when we press play, now we are in the idle state, and when we move and let go, we get back to the idle state. So that's how animation states work. All right, it's fairly simple once you understand the concept, and as you can tell, it works quite well. So if I die, it'll reset again, but I'll go back to an idle state because no keys are pressed. So that's working great. Now, what about if we want to die? Let's say we want our character to die. What we're going to do for that is a little bit different, okay? Because we can't really, I mean, we could set a Boolean for it and have it turn on, but it doesn't really make sense because in this case, you're either dead or you're not. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit this plus again. We're in the animator again. We're going to hit plus, and we're going to make a trigger. And we're going to call this trigger death. Or let's just call it dead. Dead. Okay? And we're going to create transitions from idle to death and a transition from walking to death. And you'll notice we're not going to make a way back because if you're dead, you don't get to go back up to idle or walking. You are dead. All right, and you'll see if we move this that those little arms sort of extend. So when we click this and we scroll down to our conditions, you'll now see we have a choice here. We now have dead as one of the choices. And this is a trigger. And this gets called a little bit differently. So we are going to choose dead for both of these lines so that it instantly goes to the death sequence. And we want to turn that off, the exit time. Get rid of that. Okay, so we now have a trigger set for our character to go to death. All right, so that's great. But now, how do we implement that? How are we going to put that into our game so that we can actually watch this guy die? All right, as I told you before at the start of the video, we got a problem. If we go to our enemy collision script, you will notice right now that it instantly goes to our load scene, which means that we wouldn't even have enough time to hear him make his death sound or watch the death animation of him dying and falling down. So this is where we're going to get into something called coroutines. Okay, now coroutines are basically methods that you create outside of all the rest of your methods that you call whenever you need them. So the way we create this, quite simple. We are going to create a private, and you can call it whatever you want, but we're going to use a special one called an enumerator. Okay, this is a special type of method, and it's going to be called death. All right, so put it like that. And it looks just like our other methods, but this one can serve us a specific sort of special function. Inside this death enumerator, first of all, one thing I forgot. We need to create our public animator object. We can use the same thing, animator. We want to bring in our animator elements. So we're going to do that. That just basically makes a link to our animator, which we have inside of here. Okay, so we can call all the stuff that we've created there. So what we're going to do inside of death is we can actually take some of the stuff that we had here and move it into there. So the pickups, for example, and the load scene, for example, those two are going to actually move into death. Okay. I mean, technically we could move all of this into death if we really want. You know what? Let's do it that way. That just probably makes more sense. We're going to take all of that and put it into death. Okay, so everything that was in the collision is now inside of death. And all we have to do from inside here is when a collision is detected, we're going to put start coroutine. Okay, which, oops, why is that not? Okay, there it is. Start coroutine, and then we're going to tell it which one to run, which in this case is death. All right? And if you look, what that's basically telling it is when we get hit by an enemy, start this coroutine, death. Whatever's in here, play it. And this is where we are going to start with animator dot set trigger. Okay, because if you remember, death, or dead, sorry, it was called dead, was a trigger. All right, and that's going to set the trigger to dead, which means basically we are going to go to that animation state. Now, here's something cool that you can do with an I enumerator that you can't do with anything else. You can put this command, yield, yield return new wait 4 seconds. And what this is going to do is before any of this stuff down here below this line actually happens, what it's going to do is it's going to yield, it's going to wait. Okay, before it returns to this spot, it'll wait for 2 seconds before it does the rest of this. So, the reason this is important, oh, I see a problem. Before we go too far, we should also have enough time for the sound to play. So let's put that up here as well. So the animation is going to switch to dead. So there's going to be a little animation of him falling down. The audio source is going to play. So we should hear the oof or whatever, however you say it. And then it'll wait 2 seconds. All right. So the wait 2 seconds is going to allow this to happen. And then we have the debug log, which we really don't need anymore. The variables will switch back, the pickups will go to 0, and then it'll load the scene again. So we'll die. All right, so let's save that, and let's test it out. Here we go. So everything's working beautifully. Now let's get hit by an enemy. It's not working, and I'll tell you why. I know exactly why. Because we didn't attach our animation for that death sequence in here. Okay, so you see in the collision, it doesn't know what it has to affect. Remember this from last time. So we have to actually take our character model and tell it that we want it to play the death sequence on the character model. All right, let's try that again. So here we go, walking around and get hit, and there we go. And you heard the oof, and then it resets. So we get a chance to actually die. Now there is one little glitch to this, okay? I like showing the glitches as well. For 2 seconds, because our keys aren't disabled, watch what happens. When I die, I can actually move around for 2 seconds, really quick. So there's a little glitch. But we're not gonna worry about that right now because this is working pretty decently. It resets, and you can do a lot with this. You can have a punch sequence when, you know, your character, an attack key is pressed. You could have all sorts of different things happen using animation states. They're super, super powerful, super useful. And in this case, it's a very simple example, but you can see that you can have an entire page of animation states for one character. And it's all controlled by the triggers and the booleans and all these different values here, that when they are triggered, those animations will play. All right, we're getting close to sort of polishing this game off. We got a few more videos to go, but thanks for sticking around. That was a long one. In the next one, we're going to look at adding a few more finishing touches to this, and we'll see where we go from here. Stay tuned.